Hello, everybody. So now that we have looked at some basic organization of your paper and some writing styles through just writing more clearly to some grammar rules and using basic punctuation, let's go to this next section now and talk about uh, crediting your sources. And this is chapter 6. Now we're going to skip chapter 5, displaying results, because for our purposes within the classes in which you'll be submitting work, you're not going to do any statistical analyses. You may do that in an ed research class, and you go back to chapter 5 to look at how to display the results of your individual analysis. But for now, we're going to move on to chapter 6, and that is crediting sources. So, crediting sources is a important thing to keep in mind as you're doing your work. So, if you don't, you are plagiarizing, okay? And you can actually self-plagiarize, believe it or not. So, you must cite the authors, whether you paraphrase, quote an author directly, or describe an idea from an author that influenced your work. Provide information for all facts and figures that are not common knowledge. So, and people get dismissed from college for plagiarizing on major papers, major assignments. We are watching politics now, and we see national figures being dismissed for plagiarism. So plagiarism is a very important, and the key to get around plagiarism is simply citing your work. Okay, and the big thing here I want you to see, because generally people know, oh, I got this quote from McWilliams, so I need to cite McWilliams. It's not just quotes, it's ideas. If you get an idea and you use somebody's idea to strengthen um, your point, or to refute something, then you need to quote or cite the person for idea. And you're not there yet, but if you cite your own work, then you have to. If you quote your own work, then you have to also cite that. Otherwise, it's self-plagiarism. So how do you do that? Let's talk about citations. So in-text citations or quotations is material directly quoted from another author's work or from one's own previously published work. Uh, Material duplicated from a test item and verbatim instructions to participants. Should be reproduced word for word. Incorporate a short quotation. So, for what we're looking at, a short quotation is less than 40 words. And we're going to enclose that with double quotation marks. So let's look at a couple of examples. Now keep in mind, these are in text. So what do we mean by in text? We're going to see what we mean by that as we keep going. So direct quotations must be accurate. The quotation must follow the wording, spelling, and interior punctuation of the original source, even if the source is incorrect. And here are different ways to do it. Now, keep in mind, and this is probably the number one issue with quotations, is when you have a direct quote, you have to list a page number. If it is not a page number, if it's just something you found on the internet or in a newspaper, then you have to list the paragraph so that the reader can easily go to your source, count down the number of paragraphs you have, and find the quote in there. Or if it's a research paper that doesn't have any link, any page numbers, Then put the section of the research paper like the last one. Paul stated blah, blah, blah. Discussion section, paragraph 1. You have to have a page number with a direct quote. Period. Okay? Citations, text, and parenthetical. So here are a couple of different ways to use citations. So in-text citation then is an example of the first one, where we would say like Keller, and then we put the year, found that early onset social anxiety disorder results in a more potent and severe course. Notice that the first time we mention an author, we have to list the year of publication. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Parenthetical citations are slightly different than in text. A recent study showed that there was a relationship between alcohol abuse and major depression. Kessler, 2003. Personally, I like the first one better, but if you go with the second one, I'm not going to ding you on it. Okay, it's almost anthropomorphization to go with that second one, in my opinion, but as long as we get the source in there, you're fine. So here is the basic citation styles directly from the APA manual, and you can see here the way you follow this is this is the first citation, so one work by one author would simply say Walker, 2007. Subsequent in text. So in text means we're stating the author's name in the text, if you didn't get that. So everything after that will look the same. Parenthetical, Walker, 2007, everything after that looks the same. So there's no difference in multiple citations of an author. When you have two authors, the only difference comes when we put it in parenthetical citation, and instead of and, we use the little ampersand. And then three or more authors changes slightly the first time you mention the authors, whether it's in text or whether it's parenthetical. You have to list all the authors. Every time after that, you simply list the first author and then use et al. Okay? I'm sorry, that was by three authors. One work by four authors. You can see where the difference is. You list all four of them the first time. If you're using parenthetical, you list all four of them, but again, we use the ampersand instead of the and. Every subsequent time, you use et al. And then five authors, six or more authors. So six or more authors is where we see the citation, whether it's in text or parenthetical. Simply list the first author and then from there on use et al. Okay? And the last one here deals with groups as authors, and so these are readily identified through their abbreviations, and you can see how we do that. The National Institute of Mental Health, and then we just put NIMH in parentheses 2003 and everything after that. When we use parenthetical citation, we again spell out National Institute of Mental Health, and then in brackets put NIMH, and then everything after that is in parentheses. Groups, no abbreviations as authors. You can see how this is done as a university. So that's the basic idea. This is a chart right out of your APA book, Chapter 6, Section 1. So now let's talk about quotations. So that was citations. Remember what we're citing, not just direct quotes, but also ideas. It's a big thing, ideas. Now let's talk about quotations. So, first example here, the author stated the placebo effect disappeared when behaviors were studied in this manner. Neal, 1993, page 215. But he did not clarify which behaviors were studied. So you can see here our direct quote from Neal's is the placebo effect disappeared when behaviors were studied in the manner. We put the citation directly after the quote in the middle of the sentence. And notice we put the author, the year, and then the page number. What did I say earlier? You have to have a page number with the direct quote. Another example, confusing this issue is the overlapping nature of roles in palliative care, whereby, quote, medical needs are met, non-medical needs may be addressed by anyone on the team, end quote. Carl and Chain, 2006, page 112, period. So those are examples. I want you to see that you have page number in there along with the author and the year. Now, we said if it's less than 40 words, if it's 40 words or more, we'll use what are called block quotes. And typically block quotes are not done in multiple paragraph form, but just in case, you would indent, do a double indent. That's why I showed you this, but notice how block quotes are written. First of all, freestanding and on a new line. And so, in other words, we're saying here, others have contradicted this view. And this is a quote, okay? This quote has more than 40 words. It is freestanding, meaning it is not joined to the sentence. Double space quotation, make an additional indent the new paragraph line only if there's a new paragraph in the quotation. So we're going to indent every line of this quote in from our original text. If you have a new paragraph, you double indent. That's what that means right there. Okay. And if we don't list our authors and year up here, then at the end of the quote, you put a period, and then after the period, you put the author, year, and page numbers. If you were to put the year, or the author and the year, in the sentence introducing the quote, instead of saying others have contradicted this view, we said Purcell, 1997, contradicted this view. Then we continue with our direct quote, our block quote, and end it with a period, and then instead of repeating the author and year, since we've already done that, we just put the page numbers in parentheses. So block quotes, they're used quite a bit, generally probably overused because students think they're important. You're not going to use them nearly as much as you do a regular quote. And typically when they're used, the first few times they're used incorrectly. In-text citations or quotations. So we've seen this already a few times. Notice what we say here. The author stated the placebo effect, ... disappeared when. So what is that ... in our sentence? What that is, we call an ellipse. And the reason we have that is because this is a direct quote that we're pulling from our source. But we don't want to list the whole sentence that the source used. We only want to take part of the sentence. So what the ... does, or the ellipse, ellipsis, is that it shows the reader that this is a direct quote from the source, but there was part of it omitted. And so that's why we put that ... in there. Okay. Use 3 spaced out periods within a sentence to indicate you have omitted material from the original source. And there is no spacing. So you could type placebo effect, apostrophe, ... disappeared. and Word will automatically space those equally for you. Okay. So 3 dots are used when you're omitting something within a sentence. When you combine two separate sentences and make it look like one, you actually use 4 dots. Dot, 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 dot. This indicates an omission between 2 or more sentences. Okay. Do not use an ellipsis mark at the beginning or the end of a quotation. And that's important thing to keep in mind is that the use of an ellipsis is only in the middle. You cannot begin or end a quotation with an ellipsis mark. So now let's talk about citing our source. Here we're looking at in text. If we want to use the same source multiple times within a sentence, okay? So we see the incorrect version first. Sells, parentheses 2009, stated the composition of the moon originates from planets other than Earth. The moon, according to Sells, parentheses 2009, is less than half the distance from the Earth that it was 10,000 years ago. The correct way, notice the difference here. Sells 2009 stated the composition of the moon originates from planets other than Earth. The moon, according to Sells, is less than half the distance from the Earth it was 10,000 years ago. So the rule here is if you are repeating the author in the same paragraph after you have initially stated the author and used the year for reference, you don't have to use the year again. It becomes redundant because there's no chance for the reader to get confused. Okay. So that's in text. What does it look like in parenthetical? Parenthetical is just a tiny bit different. So you can see here, if you look at the incorrect way, we say Sells 2009 and then just Sells again. But actually that's incorrect in parenthetical. In parenthetical citation, meaning you're putting them in parentheses at the end, you're not stating the author. You have to list the year when you list the author. Okay. In a parenthetical citation, anytime you list an author, you're going to put a year with them. And if you have a direct quote, then you're going to put the page number at the end after the year. Multiple authors in text. So you can see here, this goes back to the chart 6.1 that I showed you. Jones, May, and Smith, parentheses 2009, blah, blah, blah. The moon, according to Jones, May, and Smith, 2009. So the correct way to do this is Jones, May, and Smith, 2009, blah, blah, blah. The moon, according to Jones et al., was most likely moved to this galaxy by a giant race of beings. Multiple authors in parenthetical citations. And again here, we use the first time we spell them out using ampersand. The second time we simply use et al. Okay. Multiple citations within parentheses. And where we see students with this is this very introduction here. If you start off, or at any point, if you ever say several studies or numerous studies, when you say that, you have to list the numerous studies that you just referred to. Okay, so how do you put all of those studies in your citation? Well, you list the authors in alphabetical order by the first author, and then you designate multiplications in the same year with a lowercase letter. So here's what I mean. Several studies, and here we have Derryberry and Reed, and actually Derryberry and Reed have 2 publications from 2005. So we're going to designate them 2005A and 2005B. and then Gogol, Jones, Mays, and Miller, 1999, and then Rothbart, 2003. So we don't put them in chronological order of publication. We put them in alphabetical order by the first author listed. And this lets us know that we can go back to your reference section, and Derryberry and Reed are going to have 2 publications in 2005, and so forth, okay? Secondary sources, use sparingly. And I would just encourage you, do not use secondary sources. But if you do, this is how you do it. So, for example, if we said Lacey and Walter study as cited in Booth, Cuthbert, Atkins, and Haley. So, we're referring to Lacey and Walter's study, but we did not read Lacey and Walter's study. What we read was Booth, Cuthbert, Atkins, and Haley. So, in our reference, at the end of our paper, we're not going to reference Lacey Walter's study because we didn't read it. What we read was Booth, Cuthbert, and Atkins. And so that's what we reference in our reference section. We're going to cover reference sections later on. But use this sparingly. Okay, it's just not good. What I would rather you do is go to the reference that Booth, Cuthbert, Atkins, and Haley did, find the study by Lacey and Walter, and actually read that study so that you can quote directly from it and skip Booth, Cuthbert, and Atkins. That's why we call these secondary sources. Booth, Cuthbert, Atkins is just talking about what the study said, and you're getting it third hand. Go straight to the source, the primary source, in this case, Lacey and Walter's study. General information about references. And we're going to finish this with a couple of slides here. Your reference section, since we're talking about references, your reference section is always double spaced, uses hanging indent, and we're going to look at some examples of this later on. Does not include personal communication, letters, memoranda, and formal electronic communications. In other words, when you do interviews, and you will do interviews for your advocacy project, you do not include them in your reference section. Okay, you must have the following things as part of each reference: the author, the year, the title, and the publication or publishing date. Your order of references, and we're going to mention this, and then we're going to stop here and move into Chapter 7 in the next presentation. But your order of references are always alphabetized by letter. You would be surprised how many graduate students don't realize the alphabetizing of references is important. If you are close, then you just keep going. So Greg, J.D. precedes Gregory, A.G. Okay. Alphabetized prefix such as M apostrophe, Mac, or Mac literally. Disregard apostrophe. So MacArthur becomes or comes before McAllister because you're just looking at letters. Okay. MacNeil, M-A-C, comes before McCarthy, M-C. Alphabetized surnames that contain articles and prepositions. De Vos precedes De Vries. Okay? And then finally, alphabetized entries with numerals as if the numerals were spelled out. So that's kind of an introduction to the reference section. But just as a quick reminder, what you saw in this piece was mainly dealing with in-text and parenthetical citations, and the fact that when you have quotations, you must have citations, and your citations must include page numbers. And the one thing that I did not mention here, that the reason we're looking at references and getting a brief introduction here at the end of chapter 6 is because according to APA, this is something to remember, the only thing you put in your reference section are the sources you cite in your paper. Okay, let me repeat that. The only thing you put in your reference section are the sources you cite within your paper. And everything you cite within your paper, other than the personal communications and so forth that we just mentioned, everything you cite within your paper has to go in your references. Okay? So with that, I'm going to leave you, and we will come back and do the last bit and talk about references themselves.